Okay, talk a little bit about seasonal effects of burning in hardwood stands. And, when you look at seasonality, it's kind of the same thing as we've got in terms of dealing with burning in pines. Anytime you begin to vary the timings of the burns, you're going to have different expression of plant patterns, flowering, habitat preferences for certain wildlife and other fauna. So it all depends on what you want. And the timing can be critical. Usually when you're looking at developing an objective for a prescribed burn plan, you've got something that you're trying to accomplish. That burn, the first burn in particular, is just the start. You've got several down the road to ultimately reach that objective. And that works whether you're dealing with primarily in a pine system or in where you've got mixed hardwoods or hardwood systems. We can use specific timings to help achieve that ultimate goal. So I just kind of cover a little bit about that. Now, season of burn, there are reasons to do some burning pretty much any time during the year. And how we define the difference between winter and summer burns or dormant and growing season burns in South Georgia versus North Georgia, there's going to be a month or two differences where we're putting those terms on those particular days or months of the year that we actually do those burns. And, this slide right here, just, normal dormant season or winter burns, December through February. Summer burns, June through September. If you're farther south, that summer comes earlier for the plants and animals in those areas. So again, you're looking at your local knowledge for those types of things. Basically it breaks down in most cases to summer burning versus winter burning, or more commonly dormant season versus growing season burns. And within those, there can be, you're going to burn at the very beginning of the growing season. Later on in the growing season, it makes a difference for particularly flowering for certain plants, things such as that. Now with hardwoods, one of the reasons that we use fire in most stands, not just specifically hardwood stands, is if we're looking for hardwood control. And the standard mantra is that we're going to do a dormant season burn to reduce the fuels, try to top kill the hardwood stems, and then come back in following sprouting with growing season burns with the subsequent burns for several years in order to kind of wear those seedlings out. Now, one of the things that happens with that dormant season burn, or the first burn in any season where you've got substantial number of young hardwoods, is you just make them mad. You're going to have a lot more stems out there because of the sprouting potential that you've got. And some species, depending on diameters, you'll get, a little bit better top kill than others, but you're going to have more stems out there. And if that's the only fire or disturbance event out there, you're going to have a worse problem with if the hardwoods are a problem already than before you did the burn. So just realize that, once you commit and put fire on the ground, you're going to have to keep doing that or some other treatments in subsequent years in order to, again, get to whatever your goal is in those particular stands. Now, with growing season burns, once you get that fuel load down, because typically a lot of the stands where we're concerned with hardwood control haven't been burned for a number of years. So we've got good fuel buildup on that duff layer, and we're trying to peel that down a little bit with the dormant season burns. We get the sprouting, then we wait until those sprouts leaf out in the subsequent year or so when we have enough fine fuels to be able to carry the fire again. Allow those leaves to expand, use those carbohydrate reserves from the root system, hit those with a fire, stress those plants even more, and we can begin to get some measure of control. You're never going to knock them all out. Uh, but, repeating that over time can sufficiently reduce those so you can get the expression of other plants on those sites. Just realize again, if you quit, what root stocks you've got out there are going to take over, and ultimately you'll get back to where you started from if you exclude fire for a long period of time. Typically you're going to have to burn initially with at least a 3-year rotation in order to begin to really knock things down and reduce those numbers. Now you can evaluate the effectiveness of your burns pretty quickly with smooth bark species. You can see here where we've got bark that's popped off of the stems, giving you a good idea that you got sufficient residence time to get top kill within that cambio layer. But typically, if you've got something like this with oak, a little bit rougher bark, you're probably not going to see that bark pop, but you'll start to see the sprouting come back pretty quickly if you've done a true dormant season burn with the spring of the year sprouting. And again, with something like this, what you're looking for is to get enough fuel load out there, and that can be somewhat questionable as to how soon you can get back into that, because if you're in a stand which doesn't have a lot of pine or a lot of fine fuels with grasses, things like that, it's sometimes tough to build up enough fuel to get that next burn within the year. So you got to play the fuel game in order to be able to determine how quickly you can get back in and do that next burn. But what you're looking for is, in a case like this where you've had that plant come to the point where the leaves are expanding, almost fully expanded, but before they really have a chance to begin any net photosynthesis where they can pack more carbohydrate back into the root system to replace what they used in order to get that spurt of growth in the spring of the year. So that's the way you can kind of wear them out. You can wear them out. If you look at diameters, this gives you a little bit of flexibility in terms of what to favor and what you can take out. And it makes sense. The smaller diameter stems are going to be much more susceptible to the growing season burns. Once you get into the 5+ inch range, you're probably going to have to look at something else in order to get control of the of the stands. And typically, what that means is you're going to have to, and I'll talk about this just a little bit more, but you're going to have to do something in addition to fire if you want to try to get specific species combinations or release specific species within a particular stand. So if your idea is not strictly just control of hardwoods, but expression of hardwoods, you've got some options there with both the timing and the diameter distributions that you might have in the stands. Now, the other thing, if you're concerned with hardwood regeneration and you're in a stand and you're in mixed pine hardwood stands, you've got competition that comes in from any kind of disturbance that creates a good seed bed, and you can get good conditions for pine regeneration, which can quickly overtop the hardwoods that might be in the stand. And we can use fire, particularly during the younger ages, when the ground line diameter of the pines are less than an inch and a half, they're typically susceptible to fire. Now it's a real gamble, and it's in terms of just how effective your fire is gonna be to control the wildling pines in this situation. And I've been on a number of burns where we've tried that, and at best it's spotty, but at least it can help if you catch them with that smaller diameter. The farther below the inch and a half diameter, the better off your chances of trying to have some successful control. And you can do those burns during the dormant season or in the growing season. They actually tend to work a little bit better on the dormant season, because if all you do is scorch the seedlings, uh, they've still got several months that they're going to have to try to survive before they can put on a bud and new foliage in the spring. So later growing season or early growing season burns with younger pines, you're probably going to see a higher level of survival than you would if you burn them earlier in the dormant season. But that can be an effective treatment to try to release some of the hardwoods that are out there. And again, it's all diameter related for something like this in terms of how effective your actual operation is going to be. Other things, these timings are pretty much the same as what we would see in more pine-dominated systems. Herbaceous plants respond to fire frequency, and you saw some of that Phil's work that he presented, the abundance of grasses and forbs. All of that leads into various flowering responses. Talked about butterflies. Several folks that I've worked with across the South that in entomology, uh, their surveys of insects are very tightly coordinated with the time of flowering of individual species within various stands. And so using or varying your burn times can be very important in terms of favoring certain flowering plants. And so those of you that are good botanists and understand those timings, if you burn a piece of property on monthly intervals, it's amazing the differences that you'll pick up in terms of the flowering responses of the plants that are out there. If you continue to burn at the same time every year, you're going to favor, one little niche out there, while suppressing a lot of other things that might be present on the site. So again, a good inventory is really helpful, and seeing how that fits into your ultimate objectives. With wildlife, again, timing depends on what you want. Our wildlife biologists in Georgia used to always say it just depends. If you tell me what you really want, and I can give you a prescription. If you want everything, you're going to have to take what you get with kind of a general guideline. There's a good publication that is at the Nature Conservancy table from Tennessee that goes through specifics for hardwood dominated stands for wildlife in terms of timing. Obviously you're concerned with nesting seasons, having brood cover, escape cover, bugging cover, and those all required little bit of differences in terms of the burns or patchy burns, which allow different age classes of understory to become established within those stands. Early growing season burns often stimulate seed production and browse quality. But again, having a little bit of everything out there typically gives you the wider range of habitats for a wider amount of species that you have out there. And again, Craig's book on on that, you can pick, if you're interested in quail, turkey, grouse, deer, squirrels. There are certain periods that you can burn that are going to be beneficial for those specific habitat requirements for those species. Now, one thing that is very beneficial, and again, what you saw at the previous talk, flying insects, they are absolutely dependent on many flowering food sources. So as you change your timing of your burns and express different flowering plants, you're going to see or enhance different insect populations that you have out there. And these can be critical for particularly new broods of game birds, things such as that, or even uh, nesting populations of songbirds. So again, the timing is kind of critical, but you've got to be a good botanist to determine when you're going to get your best responses if you're looking at something fairly specific. Amphibians, reptiles, typically cool season burns are going to be beneficial for that. Uh, avoid, like anything, avoid burns for peak season nesting with those species. And again, the mantra of patchwork burns really kind of gives you the best benefits and allows a number of cover types that things can develop with. Okay, now running out of time here, so let me talk a little bit about what I really like uh, with burning in hardwoods is if you're going to try to favor oak reproduction. Uh, and that is a possibility. And we go back to this slide right here. Notice the difference in terms of susceptibility by diameter class on the stems. Uh, Obviously, the bigger the stem, the more resistant it is to the fire, and you can play that game in order to try to formulate a good plan for oak regeneration. Now, burning is only one part of it. Uh, Light is really what you're trying to manage in a oak regeneration system. So you've got to have overstory openings in order to get enough light for the seedlings to actually survive and begin active height growth. So that requires, in this case, this is a little bit of a group selection where there's a small opening that's made. We've got regeneration in the understory. Now, with something like this, everything is going to come back in because all of a sudden it's got plenty of light. That's where you can use fire to begin to thin out some of the less desirable, the more intolerant species that are going to grow faster than the oaks, that have less fire resistance than what the oak seedlings do. That's one of the big keys that oak does have a good tolerance to fire. You're going to get sprouting, but typically with your repeated burns, you'll be able to whittle that population down to where you've got viable saplings that will develop out of that while you've controlled the thinner bark, more intolerant species. So fire and light management is going to be very important. Little bit later on, you can see something that'll come up like this. Something like this can be burned to allow more competition control in the understory. And again, going back to that graph of the diameter responses, your larger seedlings, sapling size material will be able to be released. And it just gives you an example of what you can see out there where you've got oak in the understory, the overstory, in this case, had some yellow poplar in it, which was very easily killed after it became established out there. The couple ways to do this, the easiest are managing light, shelter woods, creating openings. I'm just going to zip through here. Group selection is probably one of the more practical, particularly on smaller ownerships. We're talking about creating small openings within the stand, gives you a good patchwork for mixed hardwood regeneration in there where fire can be introduced. to help foster those along. The drawbacks are, from a logging standpoint and an economic standpoint, in today's market, it's often hard to do some of these treatments in a really economical way. But one thing that you can do is our herbicide treatments in stem injection treatments, something like a Mazapir, basal treatments with Garlon and a basal oil. They can be, very effective in allowing release or selection of certain species on a site. So using fire throughout the growing season gives you a lot of advantages in terms of trying to foster regeneration, get the seedlings established, and then begin to release them in order to dominate the site. So anyway, time for questions. I think we're right, maybe close.
Questions. Anyone? Yes.
Yes.
Have oil farm in southeast Georgia, we burn along the pine forest, but we also have property 10 miles from here up on top of the mountain with the hardwood forest. And in our experience in burning in the pine forest, if we get anywhere near the white oaks, we cause problems for them. No particular very repeated burnings we've seen that. So what's the best way to try and protect them and try and burn the hardwood forest?
It's basically the same kind of thing that we see when we're trying to begin to burn in older pine stands that haven't had fire for a while. When you start looking at what your teach byron drought index are, how much moisture you've got in that duff layer right below the surface fuels that you're trying to take off. And so, quite often what happens is good burning weather for pine stands, maybe a little bit too much for the hardwoods that you've got in there. Hardwood leaf litter, most oaks, unless you've got the entire leaf oaks, will cup up and dry and burn fairly well. So you can have a moist duff layer underneath and then skim off that surface fuel, and you'll have enough fine fuels to actually have a residence time around smaller seedlings for control. But it typically won't impact the larger trees. But that's one of the more dicey things when you're burning in hardwoods. I've done stuff in Kentucky and Tennessee and in Georgia, and sometimes you can get them to burn, sometimes you just can't get them to burn. And there's a lot of times that sweet spot where you really want to get the fire doing what you want is hard to find. So it's not frankly, it's not easy. And so, but again, moisture in that duff is going to be important. But the trees have got the resilience if that is not an issue to withstand the fires.
Thank you, David. Let's give him a hand.
Thank you.